Hey guys, we are live. Today we are going to build a new application, and this is sort of follow up from last week, and in which we'll be creating a new app that will serve as, you could call it a quiz app, a checklist, a quiz, survey, questionnaire, pretty much in a way that a user will come to an app, and then there's some questions for them to answer. They click through and they get a screen of all of these questions and they simply answer them, and we save their data into a database. I wanted to step through this from beginning to end, and today I have a guest. I've had him on before. His name is Kurt, and he was actually my mentor, some 22, 23 years ago. I think it was 1999, wasn't it, Kurt?
Somewhere in there.
Where all those COBOL programmers were freaking out about the all their apps that weren't going to work, right? And so, yeah, I actually met Kurt back. He taught some Visual Basic courses back in those days. And my first class was a COBOL class. And I quickly realized I didn't want to have anything to do with COBOL. I want to do some Windows type of stuff. So Kurt's always had the nickname the Professor. And so he was my mentor and taught me a lot of database concepts. And here recently he's gotten interested. I guess I've gotten him interested. Got you jazzed up about Power Apps, huh? So you want to learn some Power Apps,
yeah.
but man, you come to the table with a lot of experience, probably decades of experience of programming databases, all kinds of different things. And I'm so happy and glad to have you on the line here. Now, I know you have somebody come in the door with a delivery, so you might need to step out here for a moment, but you'll be right back. And so we're going to be building this app. It might take an hour, maybe 2 hours, but I want to step through this. Now, if you go to my channel here, and let's do a little search. We'll do a search for Darren Neese inspection app. I've got an app right here called the Checklist Inspection app. It was one of my first apps I did in Power Apps. People really like it. And there's a lot of comments, got 21,000 views. A lot of people ask, hey, how do you do this? How do you set up your data tables and all that type of stuff? Well, I did a live stream just last week where I sort of stepped through that application, but I didn't actually build it with anybody. But this week, that's what we're going to do. We're going to spend the next hour or so actually building out this application. And I brought along Kurt because although Kurt has tons of experience in software development, programming, database design, he doesn't have a lot of experience in Power Apps. So Kurt, what I expect you to do is slow me down, because a lot of times people do tell me I do talk fast and I go over things really fast. And I sort of get in the mind space that, these certain concepts in Power Apps, I'm so used to them. I just think everybody knows them, right? So I'm sort of hoping that you'll slow me down if I'm going over something that perhaps somebody, this is a live stream, so you guys are welcome to leave comments. I'm watching the comments here. We got Lil Jew, hopefully I pronounced that right. Matthew, hi Darren. I'm traveling in India and it's 12:30 in the night. Wow, that's dedication, staying up, man. I go to bed around 10 or 11. So that's some dedication. Thanks for joining us. I hopefully you're able to stick around the whole time, but if not, you can always watch the live stream, later on after you get some sleep there. But so this is what we're going to do. We're going to start here from scratch. Now, when I say scratch, we're going to start from the beginning. Now, if you guys follow along in my YouTube channel, let me share my screen. I just realized I'm not sharing my screen here. I always start from my application template. I call it an application shell. Now, I actually show you how to build your own. There's actually a series of videos here. If you go to my playlist on my channel, I've got a playlist here, how to create your own template. So if I go to this playlist, and I'm going to pause that, so I don't want it to play here, but I have 9 videos showing you how to build a template like I have here. Now, if you're wanting to get a head start, not have to spend a few hours going through all these videos and building it, you can actually purchase mine. I'll be sure there's a link below if you just want to purchase it. But this is what I use. This is what I recommend to anybody. You don't have to use my template. You can build your own. But, as you build out applications, you don't always want to have to build out a menu every single time, or an application header and some debugging features and all kinds of cool stuff that you might have in all of your apps. I always like to have that from the get-go. So I'll be using this as the starting point for the application. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, I've already saved this. I call this the YouTube example quiz app, and that's the only thing I've changed to my my application template here. Okay, so here at the beginning, this is a video that sort of shows you how to use the template. So I'm just going to delete that. We just have a regular old home screen here. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit. Whenever I create an application, a lot of times what I think about, I don't even think about screens really at first. What I think about is the database design. Kurt, do you, in all your application development experience, is that typically where your mind goes first, or somewhere in the initial stages?
It should be the first question everybody asks, right? Where's the data?
Yeah.
And what's in the data? Where's
Absolutely.
the data and what's in it? Yep.
Now, I know most of you use SharePoint, so we'll use SharePoint as a backend. Now, if there's enough demand, if there's enough people that actually want to know how to use Dataverse, we can go down that route in a future video. But today we'll use SharePoint because I know most of you, I did a poll and found out that 70% of you actually use SharePoint, probably mostly because of licensing costs. Perhaps your employer isn't, maybe you're working at a place that has Power Apps and everything, and they're not wanting to pay for the premium license. I believe that's mostly why people don't use the Dataverse, although Dataverse is the better data source, probably the best data source if you're talking about the Power Platform. So I created a new SharePoint list here. Now, in order to see all the lists, now I haven't created any list yet, but if I click on Site Contents over here on the left side, any new SharePoint lists are going to have these document libraries, okay? But we're going to create our own. Now, before I start creating my list, which sort of serve as database tables, I like to use this little tool over here called drawsql.app. That is the URL, drawsql.app. And in fact, what I'll do is I'm going to copy and paste over this into the comments so you guys can see that link. Okay. And I'm going to create a new diagram. And SQL Server is probably, I don't really work with MySQL or Postgres. I work with SQL Server out of those three. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this the quiz app. And I'm going to create a diagram. And what I want to do is sort of visualize our SharePoint list that we're going to create. And then we'll go create the tables. And then from there, we'll create the screens. And then we'll have a functioning app there. Okay. So in this app, I sort of want to strip it down to the very core, the essentials of what we need. And then if there's enough interest, eventually we'll sort of make it more fancy, more snazzy, maybe add in some more tables and such. But at the core, we're going to keep track of, well, if somebody's going to take a quiz, that's a user. So we'll probably have a user table, right, Kurt? Yeah, so we'll probably track maybe their name and their email address at the very least. So we'll know who is it that took the quiz or the survey or the poll. And then what we'll do is we'll have, let's see, we will have a list of questions to be answered and what those questions are. And then we'll have a table in the middle that sort of ties those two tables together. So let's do this. We'll create a new table here. And I'm just going to call this user. And we have an ID. Now, we know SharePoint automatically creates an ID for us. And big int is fine there. I'm going to add a column for full name. And you know what? With a SharePoint list, it actually gives us a title. I might just put their name in title and actually utilize that field for that. Now I'm looking for, okay, it's not really giving, okay, I guess this is the drop down here. Looking for a varchar, which is a string type of column, okay? Then I'm going to add in another column for email. Make this varchar, or in varchar. Okay, and for now, I think that's all I want to have for the user table. Okay, so I can move this around a little bit. Let's create a new table here, and we'll call this questions to be answered. Okay, so we will have an ID for sure. And then for title, let's put in the title. I'm thinking that might be the short answer. Now, a single line of text within SharePoint is going to be 255 characters. So we got to think about this ahead of time. Will our question fit within 255 characters? Okay. So what I'm going to do, we could throw that in title because that's a single line of text. It's always there in a SharePoint list. We might throw that in there. Now, what we could do, okay, I want to add a new column for all this full question. I'm not going to put a space in there. And okay, title needs to be varchar. Okay. Now, full question, I would put text. Or when we get over to SharePoint, it's going to be multiple lines of text. Okay. So we'll do that. Full questions. Now, eventually what we'll do, now right now we're just going to have a single type of questionnaire, a single quiz that will always have the same questions. Now we can make this application a little more complex where there could be, multiple different types of quizzes or polls or things to answer, not just one. But for now, I just want to keep things simple, keep things as simple and as essential as possible just to get the basic principles across, and we cover those in one session. And if there's interest, we can build on that. Okay, so we have questions there. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new table, and we'll call this user answers. Okay, so whenever I have a table, it sort of maps a one table to another. You'll have a mapping table in the middle in which we're always going to have an ID in every table. I like to have that uppercase. Big int is fine. I'm going to add a column here for user ID. We'll put that in there. Big int is fine there. And then we'll have question ID. Big int is fine. Now we will have a title. Okay. And let's make that varchar. And let's see if I can move that up. There we go. We got ID, title, user ID, question. Okay. So this user ID, now I can create the relationships here by dragging this little dot here in the middle of the screen. And you know what? I might try to zoom in on this just to make this bigger a little bit. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this table, and I got these little dots. I'm going to drag this user ID over to this ID. Okay. It says one-to-one, but it's actually one-to-many, or I should say many-to-one here. One user will have several answers. Okay. And then what we've got over here, the questions, I'm going to click on ID and drag it over to question ID. And that will be one-to-many. One question could have many answers from many users. Okay. Something that we should probably add to questions is some type of sort order. Okay. So let's go ahead and add that, because if we have 5 questions in a quiz, we don't want them to appear. We probably want them to be in a certain order. So we'll actually add this in sort order, and big int is a whole number. So I'm just going to leave that as big int. Now, Kurt, do you see any things that we're trying to keep the application fairly simple, straightforward, and we'll add on to it later. But are there any things that are sort of obvious to you that we should add as far as in columns, any of these 3 tables?
Okay, so are we going to have an actual test table that's going to be an intermediate between the questions and answers?
I think eventually we'll do that. Right now, it will just be one test or one quiz.
Because and just case, I guess the concern is if the user is going to have multiple tests, like if he's going to take the test more than one time, you have to have a date and time in there.
Right. So in SharePoint, we do have a create by, all that type of stuff. So we'll know when it's created. What I'm thinking is, a lot of times when you do a poll, you do a quiz or a test, typically you can only do it once, or the very last one is the valid one. So what I'm envisioning, let's say perhaps an initial screen where they come in and maybe I display their name and their email address. It's like, hey, start quiz, start poll. And they click on it. It looks in the answers for any previous answers and it deletes them. So if there were any previous, it deletes them and it just adds a new one. And so the way I'm thinking is just to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, we could add, like actual questionnaire table. We could have a lot of different tables here. And I'm looking at the comments here. Data is King says, how about a table for the actual answers? So the actual answers will be stored in user answers. So the answers coming in are from users. Okay. And okay, so we have these three tables. And I'm going to go back over here to Power Apps. And so this is the home screen. This is the first screen they'll see. So what I want to do is I want to insert a new text label. And I want to make this text to have the same color as what I have here within my template. And I've got a global variable, global theme, where I've got whatever, color theme that we've tied in here. And we'll say primary dark. Okay. I'll make this a little bigger. And let's change the font maybe to 20 or bigger. 48. And the text here, I want this to be, so there is a user function out here and there's 3 bits of information. Number 1 is the full name. So I'll have that there. Okay, so we've got that. Maybe make it, I'm going to copy and paste. Now the second one, I'll just put their email. Okay. Now what we could do, make sure those line up on the left side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make them centered. And sometimes Power Apps will actually help you center them. They'll put, yeah, there you go. You see that little line right there? Okay. So that's all centered. It looks a little bit off to the right. Oh. We could center it with math, but all right, so we've got the name, the email address. I'm going to go down to a screen that I always use called copy controls from here. So I have buttons that I can use that already have the theming built in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this button here. I'm going to Control C there, go back to the home screen. If you're not using a template or a application shell like I am, you can simply add a button here, okay, to bring over a button. So this button is start. Now the question is, what are we going to start? What do we call it? Poll, checklist, quiz. Let's say questionnaire. How about that? And that word we could make dynamically driven. We could make that into a variable, so somebody could set, like say the application developer or whoever's sort of deploying this application could set up the verbiage here if it's a questionnaire, if it's a survey. So start questionnaire, and we'll make the font on this a little bigger because we really don't have anything else really going on in this screen here. Okay, so here we go. Start questionnaire and maybe make it a little bigger. Okay. Now, whenever they click on this, we want to go to a new screen. And I've got a blank screen right here that a lot of times I'll duplicate if I want to create a new screen. And I'm going to move this thing up all the way up to home screen. I like all my screens that are actually part of the application near the top. Okay. And this will be the share. Spelled that right, questionnaire screen. If I hit Control-0, it will zoom that thing out just right. Okay, so we have that. So if I click on home screen, and when they click on this button, what I'm going to do here. So I have a global variable, and I explain what this is here in this. If we scroll down, which one is it? The loading spinner screen. That was the second video. So I sort of go into this global variable, how it's used. Pretty much what this makes happen is you've got like a loading animation that goes on the screen. You set it to true, and that will appear. If we do a database operation afterward, and it will actually show that animation, and when we set it to false, it will disappear. So after we do that, now we're going to do a database operation right here, and I'll put a comment here just for the time being and say delete previous questions. Okay, so we'll actually do that here later in the session, but here we'll do a navigate, and we're going to navigate to the questionnaire screen. We'll do that. And the second optional, the second parameter that is optional is the screen transition. So I'll say fade. Okay, so let's just test out this. So if I hold down Alt and actually click on that button, it will allow me to go there. There's the questionnaire screen. Okay, so that works. Now, let's go in and add a little bit of data here. So something else we need to do in the database is we need to add user if they aren't already there, okay? And also we need to pull in these tables that we have yet to create. So let's go ahead and do that. Create a new list. User. I'm not going to show that in the navigation. I'll click create. So this is simple. We already have an ID. We already have a title because this is a SharePoint list. So we'll just create one for email. Single line of text. Give us up to 255 characters. I'll hit save. And then what I'm going to do is, this is a little annoying thing within SharePoint. It likes to show you that it did something. I'm going to go into show hide columns and make sure that ID is showing so I can see that and apply. So this table is done. Okay, so if we go over to our ERD diagram, ERD stands for Entity Relationship Diagram. So we already have an ID, title, and email. Very good. Now let's create our questions. So we got full questions in sort order. So I'll click back over to Site Contents. Okay. Questions. And I want to make sure that ID column is there and I can see it. It's the very first one. So we'll apply that. And we'll put in here multiple lines of text for the full question. No spaces. Question, multiple lines of text. And then we also need a sort order, which will be a numeric number. Okay. Sort order. Very good. So we have those. And then we need our mapping table in the middle. So we'll go back over to Site Contents, user question, and then we have user answers. Okay, so we've got user ID and question ID. Make sure the ID is showing like we did with all the other tables. We'll add a number here. And this will be user ID. Then we'll add another column number. And this will be question ID. And we have all three of our tables If I click on this little icon up here in the upper left corner, it says PA. I'm actually going to click on that. I'm going to copy the URL to this SharePoint site. Okay, so this is the very home page for this SharePoint site. And when I go back over here to Power Apps, I'm going to click on Data Sources. So if I open this up, you'll see Data. Okay. Now we're going to add the SharePoint connector. So I'll scroll down. Okay. Enter the SharePoint URL. So if I paste that there, now something you notice it appears here at the top. So it's always good to have this URL just in case you don't see it in the first few. I'm just going to click connect. And there we go. We have questions, user, and user answers. And I'm going to click on connect. So those three things are there. Now here within my application template, I do have an area for application administrators. So if I'm writing an application for somebody that is going to administer all these questionnaires to users, I'm going to set them up as an app admin so only they can see this particular screen, application administration. So from here, I want them to add questions to the quiz. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add a gallery. Media, where is it? Layout. There we go. A blank horizontal gallery. Okay. Now this is going to tie into the questions. And I'll put a little label here. I'm going to put a border around this gallery so I can see what I'm working with here. Maybe give it a neutral color, like some type of a gray color. Okay. So this will be a list of our questions. And then because the application administrator is only going to be used by a main user, not by 90% of the users. And because I'm trying to cover this material a little quicker, what I'm going to use for this back office or this app admin, I'm actually going to use a form here. You guys probably aren't used to me using forms, but I'll use one here on this particular screen. I'll say input, and I'm looking for, now Microsoft changed this menu structure around, so sometimes I have a little hard time finding stuff here. Here's an edit form. That's what I'm looking for. And this will make this screen very quick and easy. And the reason why I'm doing this on this screen is that this really isn't the heart of the application. I mean, we could go over here to the site contents, go into questions and add 5 questions really quick. But, you know, if this is a real app, we probably do want an app admin screen so somebody could manage all the questions. I'm going to connect to the data here and say questions. Okay, so it's tied to that one. I think we actually need to pick it from this one. So I'll say questions here. And then it's probably going to pull in some of these. Yeah, so pulled in title, full question, and sort order. So what I'm going to do is we're not really worried about attachments. And so you could do one of two things. You just delete this data card out of there because we're not really interested in that. We could do that, or you could go over edit fields and add remove things from here. Okay. And as far as in the columns for a form, I'm going to set that to 1. So we don't have a terrible amount of data here that we're dealing with. So we can have it take up the full width of that form. All right. So what I'm going to do is for the title, this will sort of be the like the short description of the question. And we don't even have to display this to the user. The full question will be multiple lines of text, or could have quite a bit of a question there. So what I want to do is click on edit fields for this form for the full question. And I'll say edit multi-line text. So that should make that text box be multiple lines of text there. So this gives us a little more space. Now we could actually open this up a little more, provide a little bit more space. We could do that. Okay. Very good. So those are the three things that we have there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add over a button. Actually, I'm going to need two buttons. I'm going to go over to this screen called copy controls from here. And I'm going to get these two purple buttons. I'm going to use two buttons. They have a little different gradient of purple there. And I'm going to go over to application administration screen and paste these two buttons there. Now, one of these will just simply be save. Another one will be add new. Okay. And this form here, it's called form 1. We should probably give that a meaningful name, or we can say FRM question. Okay. In the save button, notice we have the show spinner. Well, right here in the middle, we'll do our database operation with the data that they've entered in the form. We'll call this submit form. I will give it the name of the form, which is FRM question, in parenthesis, and a semicolon there. Okay, so that will actually do the save for us. Okay. Now on the add new, what we're going to do for the click event, so we've got on select right here, so it's already been selected for us. And if it didn't do it for you, if you're following along, make sure you get the on select there. Now what we're going to do here is we'll say new form. Okay, and we'll say FRM question. So that will initialize that form to be new. Now the question is, if let's say they come to this screen fresh new, what do we want the default mode for this form to be in? Do we want it to be in edit mode or new mode? And what I would say, you see this where it says default mode here, we'll change that to be new. So if they come here fresh new, perhaps they want to add new questions. So we'll set that up to be that way. So let's add in some questions here. So let's think of a scenario. What type of a quiz or test do we want to sort of come up with, Kurt? Can you help me out with some ideas here?
Questions about databases.
Yeah.
What is, I mean, are we doing a multiple guess? Are we doing a true false?
I think initially what we'll do is we'll have just initially, just to keep the app simple, it will just be single line of text, question, single line of text for an answer. What do you think about, let's say, an onboarding process? You think that'd be a good example? Let's say we hire somebody new into the organization and we ask them certain questions like, what certifications do you have? Do you have forklift training? Do you have, what skills do you have? What would you like to get out of this job? Where do you want to be in 5 years? That type of, do you think that would be a good example?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So, I'll call this job title. Maybe that'll probably be a good first question. What is your job title? And the sort order will make that 1. We're thinking they're a new employee, they're coming in, so they should know what their title is. Programmer 1, programmer 2, that type of thing. I'm going to hit save. Okay, here we go. Job title. And so we could have that there. Now, I entered this gallery. Did I make that a horizontal one? I think I did. I meant to make that a vertical. So I might need to redo that. Insert. It needs to be going down. So that would be vertical, blank vertical gallery. I did not mean to put that into the other gallery. I'm going to click outside the gallery. We'll say insert. Let's see here, not input. Blank vertical gallery. There we go. Now what I can do to save time is I can just Control X that label, click here and paste that in. Good. Now it's probably freaking out because it's not connected to any data source yet. So what I'm going to do here is set it up to look at the questions. I'll remove that other one there that I sort of messed up. Give this a border of like a nice gray color. In each row, there we go. And I might have the full question here beside it. So instead of title, we'll say full question. And maybe have that take up the full space there. Okay, there we go. And all right, there we go. So what is your job title? Now what we'll do is we'll click on add new. We'll add a new question and we'll say previous experience, briefly describe your past experience, sort order 2. Add a new one here, and we'll say would be a good question. I'll just say certifications. Degrees or other credentials. Sort order 3. Okay, so we've got 3 questions. So that's enough to sort of get us started here. And really, these questions could be anything. In the previous application that I did with the inspection app, what I had there was, if I go into this, what you see is they were going to do an inspection in a car, and they wanted to know if all the different things on the car worked before they did an installation, and they did a post-install installation. And the only answers I allowed had a drop down, which was yes, it works, no, it doesn't work, or it doesn't apply. Okay, so we have some good questions here. Now, if we go back home and we click on Start Questionnaire, we'll go to this new screen. Now, what I could do is I could reuse something we have on another screen. If I go back to the tree view, I go back to the application, I could actually reuse or repurpose this gallery that we started, okay? And I can copy that, actually paste on the questionnaire screen, and make it bigger, and then allow a place for them to actually answer it here, okay? So I'm going to click on something inside the gallery, and I want to paste in a text box. Now, I already have a text box or a text entry control down here on the screen called Copy Controls from here. And there's the text box. I'm going to copy that. Go up, click on something inside the gallery, and there we go. And for a text input type of control, I'm going to take out the default text. Okay. And we can actually put some hint text in here. Please type answer here. It'll be like a little faint gray. Okay. And so the height of this text box, it looks like it's 40, which is good. Now I'm going to make this a little bit longer, but I messed up the height. So I'm going to reset that to 40. Now, what they'll do is they'll see all the questions. And I don't know that we really need this short title. I'm going to take that out, make this a little bigger. Okay. Right. And then what we will do at the bottom is we'll put in a button called, submit questionnaire. Okay, so I'll go back to copy controls from here and grab a nice fresh button. Here at the bottom. And we could say submit question. There. Longer. There we go. Okay. So we have the questions. We have a place for them to answer. Let's go back to the original screen and make sure we have all of our database operations that need to happen there before we actually get to this screen. So back on the home screen, on the start questionnaire, add user if they aren't already there. Okay. So we'll need to do an if statement here. Okay, we'll do an if. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the row count of the users table with somebody with that email address. Okay. So count rows. And we'll check to see if that is 0. And if it is 0, then we'll add a new record. Okay. So what I'm going to do is filter users. That is the name of our table, is it not? No, it's actually user. Now, Kurt, when you create database tables, let's say for customers or user, do you use a singular or a plural? What's your methodology?
Usually it's plural.
Usually it's plural. Yeah. So as you can see here, I use plural for questions. I use singular for user, and then I use plural for the mapping table. And I'd sort of recommend if that you stay consistent, either go one way or the other. Okay, so we've got user. So if I we're doing this again, I'd probably make them all plural. Filter user, and we've got pretty much the criteria we want to slim this down on. So pretty much whatever the email is, we want to check to see if we have something for the that matches up with the current user. So we'll use that user function. Email. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to indent this stuff over because it's already starting to be hard to read for me. Okay. You filter the user table based on the email. Okay. Now, this count rows, you see these little double lines here. These double lines mean we might have a problem with delegation. And what that problem is if we have more than 2,000 users that have my email address, then it's only going to return 2,000, whatever we have the limit set at.
Hey, Darren.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if anybody out there is wondering what is delegation and what does that mean? And what does that mean?
That's a good question. So delegation, let's just talk about it in the real world, not even programming or software development or anything. Delegation is you're going to have somebody else do something instead of yourself. Okay. So you're going to allow someone or something else to do the work for you. So in this case, what the word delegation is used for is we're here in Power Apps and we're inside this application and we're talking to a data source, a database. We're using SharePoint as a database. And what we're trying to do is we want it to do most of the query type of work. So we want it to give us a result set back, and we want to delegate all that energy of looking through all that information and come back with hopefully exactly what we want. Now, count rows is something, in this case, is not delegable with SharePoint. Now, different data sources, let's say count rows, would actually be delegable to Dataverse if we were using that. But with SharePoint, it's not. And that's why it's giving us these double lines here. But really, email addresses are fairly unique within an organization. So we really should only have one there. So this delegation warning, it's a warning. It's not really an error. It's a warning. It's warning us just in case, hey, if you ever have more than 2,000 rows, that could be a problem. And by the way, that that number comes from, if we go into the settings for the application, I'm going to click on this ellipsis or these 3 dots here. I'm going to click on settings. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find, oh, look, data row limit. So by default, it's 500. And the maximum you can set that is 2,000. And that's why I say 2,000. Typically, within an application, I'll set this to 2,000 almost every time. But if you set it, keep it at 500, then that's as much as you'll get back from a data source. So I think
if I could interrupt just real quick.
Sure, absolutely.
So from an understanding point of view, just to understand. So when you run into delegation problems, in other words, the count rows is okay if we're less than 2,000 people, right, or 2,000 records, right? It's okay. It's saying that Power Apps can handle this on its own without delegation, without delegating anything. But if you need more than 2,000, Power Apps needs to do some delegation, and count rows is not allowed in the SharePoint environment. If we were using some other environment, then it would be able to, Power Apps could delegate that to that environment if it went over 2,000 records, right?
Yeah, like Dataverse has that capability of actually doing a count row and actually doing that type of a query and just returning a single value, the number, where SharePoint's not able to do that. So Power Apps has to look through all the rows it gets back, and at the most, it can handle is 2,000.
So what we have to worry about as developers is if we're going to use these kinds of functions that aren't delegatable, then we have to be able to reduce our data set to make that small chunks so that Power Apps can handle it without running into those problems, right?
Right.
Okay.
And so I'm going to exit out of this and address just exactly what you just said here. And if you have something inside this count row, so the count rows is what's giving us the warning. If whatever is inside this, we always know it's going to be under 2,000. In this case, at the most, we should only be getting 1 back. Okay. So I know this is never going to be an issue. So it's either going to be 0 or 1. If we have a bug, we might see something like 10. Like if we're not, see, it says delete previous questions. Well, let's say we had a bug where we actually accidentally we inserted another user with the same email address, which shouldn't happen. But if it does, we got a bug or whatever. But at the most, let's say if there is a bug, we probably only have 3, 4, maybe 10 or a dozen or something. We wouldn't have 2,000. But in that case, what we want to know is if there's any in there. And in this case, if it is 0, we're going to insert a new row. So I said all that to say we're probably never going to have the delegation issue in this context.
Right.
Just not an issue.
Will never be a problem. It will never be a problem in this case. And if you do have that problem in this case, then you got bigger problems than what delegation is. Right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. All right. So if we do have, if we have the count rows and we've got 0 rows in there, we want to do an insert, or we're going to add a new record into that user table. So how we do that is we're going to use the patch function. And the patch, so we'll type patch, and we'll use the parentheses there. There's 3 parameters with the patch function. The first one is, what is the data source? Well, it's user. That is the data source. That's the name of our SharePoint list. The second parameter, it wants to know what record. Well, patch allows us to update records or patch records. But in this case, we don't want to patch an existing record. We want a new one. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a function called defaults. And default says, hey, give me a new record with all the default values for all of the fields. And in that case, it's like empty strings, and for the ID, it will be the next ID. Okay, so I'm going to actually type in defaults here, and we're going to pass in the data source again. Say, hey, give me a new record. Give me all the default values for that user database table or SharePoint list. Okay. Now, the third parameter in Power Apps, if you ever see curly braces like this, you should think to yourself, oh, here's curly braces. This is probably a record of values. Now, perhaps somebody's new to database stuff. Kurt, how would you describe what exactly is a record?
Right. I'm glad you decided to address that. I'm sure there's somebody out there going, what's a record? You know, so before you answer that question, you have to talk about fields, right? So if you were thinking about rows and columns, like and most people know about Excel, they know about spreadsheets, right? So that you've got rows and columns in spreadsheets in each cell. So a column would be a field, right? A column would be a field, and a row would be a record. So when you look at it from that aspect, so a record is a collection of fields or a collection of columns, right? So
that's right.
When you see those curly brackets, you're saying, give me all the fields that you want to be updated or added into this.
Yeah. And I brought up the SharePoint list for the questions because we actually have data there.
Right.
And whenever you think about architecture or building architecture, and, you know, back in really old architecture, you usually have these huge columns that hold up the ceiling, or, you know, and so a column always runs up and down, right? Vertically. So in this case, we're looking at a table of data or database table. So this ID would be a column. It runs up and down, right? So if we had you could also think of a spreadsheet. If you ever worked with spreadsheets, you got columns, always run up and down, and you usually have the name of the column at the very top, right? And then, so each of these columns has this name. So the name of the column, I guess we call that a field, right? The field name. The field name for this is ID.
Yeah.
And we got the title field. So we're talking about, but if we're talking about one record or one row, you could use the word row and record interchangeably here. So I selected this first record, the first row.
Right.
And the field for this record is 1. The field for title is job title.
I kind of want to point out to the people, though, that depending on your verbiage that you're using, kind of tells about what your background is. So if you talk about things like, well, you know, the column, the title column, or the full question column, people are going to say, well, this probably isn't a programmer here. You know, programmers and people that work with databases are going to say, well, the field, the title field, or the full question field. So fields and records are what we usually call things, you know, in the programming world, right? Yeah. And in rows and columns, that's when you're in the spreadsheet world. So yeah,
absolutely.
And of course, programmers look at people that do spreadsheets, and we go, well, you know, you're a user, you know.
Well, what the great thing about Power Apps is Microsoft has designed it to sort of pull in. It's almost, I would say, designed for power users that are sort of advanced.
It is.
They've got all these spreadsheets. They want to create an app out of this. So maybe they do come from a background of just being a user.
Right.
That doesn't
mean, one of my goals is to get them over that hump, to go from user to power user, to say, okay, well, we're going to be talking about fields and records here. You know,
absolutely.
We're not going to be working in spreadsheets, although we can. We're not going to. You know. Yeah. I think that's
You could pull in an Excel spreadsheet with Power Apps, right? It's just not that great of a data source. There's actually quite a few limitations. But what were you going to say?
Well, and you just kind of went there. When you start talking about fields, you start talking about typed data, which you haven't discussed, and I don't know if we're going to get into that too much. But when you're dealing with fields, you're dealing with data types like numbers or letters or dates or pictures or images, you know. They actually
just sort of touch on that point just really quick. I'm going to describe what I'm doing on the screen. So if you go to list settings, it's going to show me a lot of different things here, but I want to sort of show the users what you're talking about, the different types.
Yeah.
So you got title. So here's the type, single line of text. There's modified. There's the date and time field. So that's what you mean by type, right?
That's exactly right. Now, when you're dealing with spreadsheets, though, and rows and columns, you can put any old data in each column, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But when you're working with the programming world, when you're dealing with a Power App environment, for the people who have a lot of experience working with Excel and spreadsheets, but they're trying to convert over to Power Apps, you need to consider what kind of data types you're putting in that bucket. What are you putting in that field right there? You know, if you've got a paper bag, you can't carry water in it. So if you have right, so you have to have the right bucket for it, right? So what we're dealing with a data type, you've got to have the right bucket. That's the bucket that you're holding the data in. And a number has to be numbers always, and you can't add letters to numbers. So 2 plus first name is never going to work. It's gonna make your program break. So we have to be concerned about the types of data that we're working with. And
Kurt, I love that, man. I love how you describe that.
The bucket,
I would have never gone into that. Thank you so much.
I think it's important. I know that I might have confused some people in that discussion right there.
I think this is great, man. This is the type of stuff that you taught me over 22 years ago, man.
But maybe at some point, what we could do is actually have a live stream on data types and live stream on
I would love to.
How to consider what to consider when you're dealing with data types and fields and records, to actually break down what databases are.
Absolutely. You know? Well, just good old fashioned downright database design, right?
Right.
How do you know what stuff to put into which table? What's database normalization?
I think that's really important for people going from Excel and a spreadsheet environment coming over into the programming world to know about, to understand.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Something I will touch on along with this. So here's our 3 tables here. Notice these little lines here. The user ID that is a cross-reference over here to ID. Well, these 2 columns have to be the same type, right?
That's right.
Yeah, big int. So question ID to ID. So you don't want to accidentally make this question ID text or a string, because when you're trying to match these things up in Power Apps, it's like, well, these 2 types really don't match here. Right. You know, maybe there's a space in there, or so you always want to make sure when you create these foreign. So these 2 things are called foreign keys, and this ID over here is called a primary key. So each table should have a primary key that's unique. So SharePoint does that for us. It gives us ID. So each 3 table has a primary key, which is ID in all 3 cases. And if you want to cross-reference it, you describe it user. I always put the name of the table and then the ID. So user ID, that's what I call it, and that points to that. Anything to add to that, Kurt?
The only other thing I would consider to add, and I hope I'm not confusing people by doing this, is that also when you're looking at data types like the big int, when you're looking at that big int, my mind went to first. The big int is a very good thing to use, because if you use just a regular integer and for some reason the number got too big, then it wouldn't be able to handle that number, and you wouldn't get an error, but you would get a logical error that it wouldn't find it. You wouldn't be able to figure out how come it won't find this ID. Well, it's because the number was too big and the data type couldn't handle it. But the fact that you put it into a big int means we can handle it. Now, the problem with a big int is that if you're dealing with General Motors and you've got a billion records out there, you're going to be using a lot of memory, when you might not need to. So, I mean, so there's a lot of things to consider when you're dealing with that. But again, that's a whole nother topic, right? So for another discussion, for another day.
And this draw SQ, I'm going to hit save on this diagram so I don't lose it. And I can actually share this diagram. Let me do that real quick. Diagram link. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put this over in the chat. And I do have a comment I want to read here in a moment. But what I wanted to mention here was, remember when we created this new diagram, it said, okay, which one of these 3 databases are you working with? MySQL, Postgres, or SQL Server? There was the only 3 choices. So I picked SQL Server. Now, because we're working with SharePoint, it's not really a database. If I click on create a column, I'll show you the types that you have to work with. So you got single line of text, multiple line of text, you got choice, number, currency. A lot of times I recommend, as you're using SharePoint as a database, just stick with the simple data types. Don't try to create a choice. Stick with single line of text, multiple line of text, and then number. Now you could have decimals. So in more advanced database systems, like even Access or SQL Server, you've got different types of numbers. You have int, which is short for integer. So Kurt, something you touched on was big int. So within SQL Server, you have, well, regular int can only go what, plus or minus 32, 30.
32,768. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's using how many bytes for that? Like 2 bytes?
Oh, 4 bytes. 4 bytes.
4 bytes.
Total. Yeah.
And so if you need like a number that goes beyond 32,000, well, you need to use a bigger integer. So it gives more space for that column or that field within the database. Yeah. So anyway, there's all kinds of good stuff. When you get into a bigger database system, there's more things to think about. There's more data types to work with. And so that's what we're seeing over here in this diagram where it says big int, or let's say in varchar. Well, in SharePoint, this is called single line of text. Where over in SQL Server, it's in varchar. Now there is like a text area, which is pretty much unlimited amount of text. I believe that's called just text, if I'm not mistaken, or if there's that access has, actually Data's King just commented, and he's actually very familiar with access. My goal is to convert access databases users in spreadsheet users into Power Apps user. It's a challenge. Yeah, I bet. When you're coming from any other system into another system, that's usually a challenge because those systems are different.
See, and the comment that Data is King just made kind of tells me, Darren, that we really need to have a future, near future, like maybe next week or the week after future, 2-hour live feed on nothing but breaking down spreadsheets and see, because like you talked about, SharePoint is a great stepping stone for people that are in spreadsheets to get them into these, to making fields instead of columns. It's a great stepping stone to that. And then going from that into the Dataverse or SQL Server or MySQL to actually a real database management system. So like Data is King trying to convert his users into Power Apps users. That's how you do it, is by having a discussion, a very thorough discussion on that.
Yeah, I'd agree. That's some good stuff.
We got to do that, Darren.
Take a step back, look at the forest rather than the trees, and look at everything else that we really need to consider before we're just cranking out these applications.
Right. And if I can just point out one more thing in that. If I can just point out one more thing.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're an expert user and if you've been using Power Apps since it started, or if you've been programming for 100 years, like I have, or if you're a beginner. It's always good to take a step back and look at those fundamentals and revisit what you're doing as far as and how you're thinking about stuff. So I think everybody, it would apply for everybody to kind of go back and look at the basics again, you know? Anyway, okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Yeah, that's all good stuff, man. That's why I have you here.
All right.
Okay, so let's go back and see where we were at here. Okay, so we're going to insert a new record. So I said all that to say this, curly braces. So we need to give it all the field values, and inside the curly braces we have name value pairs. So we're actually going to give it. Okay, what's the title? Well, let's say the user dot full name. Okay, so I said name value pair. It's a pair of values. So that's the field name title. And this is the value I want to put in it. Well, the other thing I want to do is email. Okay. And I'll say, give me the email for the current user. Okay. And that should give me. Now, something to keep in mind is the patch will actually return a record, the record that it was updated or inserted. So I want to capture that. Let's do that. Let's use a set. Okay. Now set is what you use to create a variable or to set a variable. And GBL is the recommended practice from Microsoft to name your global variables. And we'll say user. Okay. We use a comma. So that's the name of our variable. And the second parameter into set is the value that we want to put into that variable. And I'll end with the ending parenthesis there. Okay. Now, if they're already in this user table, we're going to get a value of 1, which will fall to the false part of this if statement. Well, I don't really need to do anything in the else block because they're already in there. There's nothing else I want to do with them. But if you wanted to do like something like maybe update their something, maybe another field, you could put it in a completely different patch. and go get that record, and you can patch it. But for right now, we'll just leave it simple as is. So we add them right here. So I don't know if you ever do this, Kurt, but you have the little comments, little dividers here. Make your comments. Would you say comments are important when you write code?
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother live stream discussion, is commenting your code, right?
Yeah. Not only if somebody else comes around and needs to maintain your application, but what about yourself? What if you wrote it 2 years ago or 6 months ago? What the heck was I thinking here? Have you ever done that? Ever had that thought?
Yeah. I think the most important thing to talk about right there is always be consistent. So be very consistent on how you do it. Like you just did your comment, you have the dashes and you have an equal sign going across there to border your comment.
Right.
If you're going to do that one place, do it everywhere, so that users, not only does that define who you are, so you can actually look at your code and you can say, you can tell that you authored that code. I know I authored that code because that's exactly the way I do my comments, and you have your own unique style. But make sure that you're very consistent at that all the time, because then people, including yourself, know what to expect.
Kurt, I remember your class, man. You would get out the red marker if things weren't consistent.
Boy, yeah.
Man, you would rip us, man.
Yeah, flunk. Those first labs were
minus 10 points. Indentation, or your comments aren't consistent. You didn't care. You didn't care how we indented, like right here. We got like 4 spaces or a tab. You didn't care if we used 2 spaces or 4 spaces or we used tabs, just as long as we were consistent, right?
Always use 4. Yeah, that's right. To me, that's more important than how well you code, is how well you can be a consistent coder. If you're a consistent coder, you're going to be a good coder. You're going to be good, because eventually you're going to figure it out. But if you're not consistent, you're not going to be good at any of it. So that's the number one thing. If I can't get anything through anybody's head, always be consistent in what you're laying out. Yeah,
absolutely. So Data is King says, my spreadsheet users only use about 10% of Excel, but they're comfortable with what they use. Yeah, there's a lot of people. I mean, if you do a search for, like on Google Trends, how popular the keyword Excel is over Power Apps, oh my goodness, it's probably 1,000 or thousands times more popular of a keyword than, Excel's been around for what, over 20, 25 years or so.
But isn't that the way it is for all languages, though? We use 10% of the language 90% of the time, and the other 90% of the language we go and look at. We look up. So 10% of the time, 10% of the code we use 90%. So we remember that, and we're comfortable using that because we use it all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've got our user in our table. So now I want to delete any previous questionnaire we've done in the past. So if they come in here and they want to do a questionnaire, I want to delete everything in the past. So that's what we're going to do here. Now I do have another comment. Christoph, consistency is like discipline. You have it or you don't. You have or not.
That's right. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes you can't even teach that. Sometimes you can't even teach it. It's a discipline. You either got to want to do it or you don't. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in order to delete all my previous questions, the table that I'm going to be deleting out of, it's not the questions, it's any answers that I've given in the past. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say remove if. Okay. And there's 2 parameters for remove if. The first parameter is what is the data source? What's the table? So in that case, it's going to be user answers. Okay. And we want to give it a criteria. The criteria is going to be.
Okay, Darren. Just a step back if we could. Why are you using remove if? There's 2 kinds of removes, right?
That's right.
Remove. So why are you choosing remove if?
Because I want to remove all the records in a table based on criteria for the current user. I don't want to delete any other users' answers. I just want to delete mine. And the function remove a lot of times is used for a single record.
So you're going to do multiple removes here then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and in fact, as we go through and actually insert more data, we can actually sort of go back and forth and see how exactly each of these blocks of code are affecting the data. But the only answers I want to delete are the ones that apply to me. So here, I will, if you go into the, well, let me go with the database and show you what I have here. So if we go into the users table, there are 0 records, 0 rows, okay? But here in a moment, there's going to be an ID of 1, and it's going to say Darren Neese, and it's going to have my email address. And then I'm going to get a reference to that record, right? We got a reference after we patch it. After we do this, where's the patch? Right here. Here's the whole patch. It's going to return it, and we're going to store it in this global variable, global user. And then we can get at the ID. So I'm like, okay, well, go through all these answers and delete every single row that's got the user ID of 1, because I'm going to be number 1. Okay, so I'm going to go down here and I'll say user ID equals, well, we have a global user dot ID. So for every answer in that table that matches up with my ID, we're going to rip it out. I'm going to delete it. And you know what? If it doesn't find any, it's not going to delete anything because I've never answered any questions yet. Then once that's done, and it's going to be doing really, if you think about it, there's a database operation that might take a moment, a few milliseconds or a second. This patch is going to take probably a second. Then we've got all this remove if. This might take 3 seconds. So you see at the beginning of this, we have this show spinner equals true. So it's going to show my animation, letting the users know, hey, we're working on this. We're talking to the database. And then at the bottom, we set it to false. And then once we're doing our database operation, okay, we're done. Now let's leave this screen and go to the next screen. So
now,
go ahead.
Just a real quick caveat on the remove if function. Something that I found is it's not, you're not able to use remove if in all circumstances. Like if you're doing a for all, if you're in the middle of a for all loop, I don't think it likes remove if very well. It seems like I've had a lot of problems with Power Apps doing that. However, just like you said, remove is for when you're doing one record at a time. And if you're doing a for all, you're probably trying to address one record at a time. Whereas your remove if right here is you're not dealing with a for all. You're doing one time. I'm trying to delete or all the records that I need to at the moment. So,
yeah.
But just really, I just wanted to point that out to people that remove if is not always going to be able to be used.
Yeah, in this case, the remove if, it will actually have to go, it's not delegable. So it's going to bring over all of the records that matches that criteria, and then it's going to delete them there and then throw it back at the data source. So that's just something to keep in mind. There are different ways of doing deletions, so we could probably talk about that in maybe a subsequent live stream. Talk about the different ways of updating, maybe doing like a good bulk, that maybe the most performant way of, or the most efficient way of deleting a lot of. But in this case, right now, we just have 3 questions, and we have 1 user. It's probably not going to be an issue, at least for a while. But eventually, I do want to talk about that. If we're dealing with a lot of data, perhaps what can we do differently? In that case, we probably want to be working with SQL Server or the Dataverse, in which it deals with larger sets of data much more efficiently. So, so then the last step, we're going to navigate away. So let's actually do this. I'm going to run the application. I'm going to click on Start. There you go. You saw my little animation. Now, something I will say, I can tell that I forgot to do. Whenever you have an animation, I always like to, whenever I add new controls to a screen, I always like to make sure my menu's on the top of everything. And then my spinner, my little animation thing, is always at the top. Okay.
That's something I always forget to do. I always forget to do that. And you bring that up to me all the time.
Yeah, because there's no really programmatic way that we could tell Power Apps, always make sure this, like, I wish there was like a pin to top or something, like always make sure this is always at the top here. And in fact, here we go. We have a spinner. So this is the subsequent screen. So this is the side nav. Here's our spinner group. We can do the same thing to this screen. So whenever you add any new controls to a screen, you'll need to make sure those two are at the top. Okay, so here we are on the new screen. Let's go over to our database and see what happened. Oh, look at that. We've got one. We have a Darren Neese, and we have the email address. Okay. Now, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to save and publish what I have so far. And what I'm going to do is I want to share this app with you, Kurt, so I have more than one person in here. So I'm going to publish this, and I'll go over to my app, this YouTube example quiz, and I'm going to share this. And I'm going to say, see, Kurt. And I'll add this so you can go in and actually use it as a user. And I believe I've added you as a member to this site, so you should be able to see the data. Okay. And if you don't mind, Kurt, whenever you get that email, you'll get a link to the app, of course. And just click on this button and let me know when you're done, and we'll sort of see that we've got two records here.
Oh, you want me to do that right now?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Very
Perhaps
good.
if you have another screen or something, you could do that. So we have two users. Okay. Now, what are our other tables? We have questions. Now, we know we have 3 questions. There are 3 questions. We have the sort order at the end. And we have a third table, which are user answers. I'm going to click on user answers. Now, some of this is not, now if I got to change our pictures here so we can see these things here at the bottom. We have user answers. Now, there are no answers yet, so we still need to do that portion. Bring up Power Apps again here. There we go. So for here, as I answer the questions, I have a single button that's going to save multiple answers. Okay. So let's think of a very straightforward way of doing this. What I'm thinking is we should loop through this gallery and take every question and pretty much insert a new record for each of the answers. Okay, so in this button here, and we've talked about this several times here in this live stream, we get that spinner turns true and then turns false when we do all our database operations. So we have a little animation. I'm going to give it a little more space in here for us to work with. Okay, so I'm going to type in here, you know what, let's just write a single patch statement that's going to insert the very first one. And after we know that that works, after we've talked about it, then I'll wrap that in a for all, because I just want to deal with one concept first and then talk about the more complex topic. So the very first one, we're just going to do a patch. And what are we inserting a row into? Well, the database table is called user answers. Okay, so that's the table. And it's always going to be a new one. We'll use that defaults again because they're always going to be new records instead of updating existing answers. And then the third parameter, as we learned out about a few minutes ago, we're going to use those curly braces. So this is the record, the name value pair. Okay, so what we have is a user ID. Now, how do we get at the user ID, Kurt? Didn't we have a reference to that before? On the other screen?
On which thing?
So we created a new user, so we should have a reference to that user. Then we put it in a global variable. So
yes, we did.
Yeah. So we do have a global user.
Yeah, user. Yeah.
We got ID. Okay, there we go. And what else do we have over here in this table that we need to put in? Well, so we populated the user ID, and here's a question ID. So I'll type in question ID. Where will we get the question ID out of here?
Okay.
So here in this gallery, these are all the questions, right? We only have 3 questions. Do we know how to pull out a question ID out of this? So what we could say is if this was referencing values within a gallery. Right now we're not in the gallery, but if we were in the gallery, we could say this item, that would give us the current record, right? And we could say, well, let's go over to, so those are the questions. Let's go over to questions real quick here. That would be the ID. So let me go here. It would be ID. Okay, so this item is causing, because we're not inside the gallery, this code isn't running inside the gallery, but whenever we create the for all, it should give us that, okay? Or we could call it my record. How about that? Just for now. So we're going to put in a, go look at our answers here. What are all the things that we need to provide? You know what? I just considered here is their answers could be much longer because the title is a single line of text. So that will only be 255 characters. So if I go to the settings for this list, let me look at this. See, title is a single line of text and it is required. So we'll have to put something in there, but we really need a new field here. Let me go over to our ERD diagram. So these are the answers. We didn't actually put something here for an answer. That was a little silly for me. So we'll say full answer. Okay. And instead of big int, this will be varchar. Okay. Okay, so the title must be provided because it's a required field. Let's put in maybe the user's name. And we'll put in like a little dash perhaps, and then we'll say now, which will give us the current date and time. Just to put something in there. Okay. And so we got the user ID, we got the question ID, and then we need to say full answer. You know what? We added it in SharePoint, didn't we? We haven't yet. So click on create column here.
You know, something about that, putting that stuff in title. You often, I hear you talk about that in your live feeds.
Yeah.
Talking about just to put something in there, you know.
Yeah.
You're really not just putting something in there. You have to put something in there, right? In a lot of cases. Maybe not in all cases, but in a lot of places, like in SharePoint and I think Dataverse too, you have to put something in that field, right? Or
well, there is a workaround. Let me finish this one thing. So the full answer, we want multiple lines of text. I'm going to go right back to what you're just talking about, Kurt. Just give me one moment.
Sure.
Full answer will make it multiple lines of text. Now down below, you need to make sure it adds in, yeah. The default is enhanced rich text, which you don't want. You always want plain text in there. Otherwise, it's going to try to put div tags and all kinds of weird stuff in there. So make sure that's plain text. I'm going to hit OK, and we're going to go back and talk about the title. Okay, so here we've got full answer, and it's multiple lines text. Now, so the title, and I have said this a lot of times, I don't like to mess with fields that the database system already creates for me. Like, you know, SharePoint automatically creates an ID and a title and a bunch of other things like created by, modified by. Let's click on this title. Now we could change the name of this to short answer or full name or whatever. We could do that, but some cases it sort of confuses Power Apps. Power Apps is trying to talk to SharePoint, and SharePoint still thinks the column is called title when really it's called something else, you know, and so it gets all confused. That's why I don't like to ever change title. Now you could say require that this column contains information. You could set this to no if you want, but by default, as it sits, I don't change it. I don't even mess with title at all as far as in changing this column. I just always, in my mind, I'm always going to have an ID that's automatically generated for me. I'm always going to have a title, and I'm always going to provide, I'm going to throw something in there. I guess it's just going back to what we've said about consistency, always stay consistent. I'm like, okay, well, that's something I can stay consistent in. I'm just going to throw something in there. It almost doesn't matter what you throw in there as long as, and if you can make it something useful, like a customer's full name or something like that, or an item name or a short name, then I'll use that. But what were you about to say, Kurt?
Well, if you're working with Dataverse, right? Dataverse has got something very similar to title. It's name.
That's true.
Spelled Name, name, right? And,
yeah.
But now one thing I've learned about was working with SharePoint. Maybe some of you guys out there that deal with SharePoint have had similar experiences with this. That once you create a field and then you try to change it, SharePoint has a problem with that. Or maybe Power Apps has a problem with SharePoint not having a problem with that, right? Power Apps doesn't seem to process it very well. So
I think what the odd thing is, I'm gonna go ahead and hit cancel here. I'm gonna show you something on this, and I'm gonna have to change our faces so people can see the very bottom of my browser screen. If I hover over title, do you see that little text at the very bottom of my screen? I might have to zoom in on this. Whoops, that's the wrong window here.
Yeah.
Try to zoom in as much as I can. And it doesn't make it any bigger, does it? At the very bottom, do you see where it's showing me the link at the very bottom of the screen? Yeah. It's white text on black on the very bottom of my browser window. You see where it says at the very end of that query string, that URL, it says field equals title.
Equals title, yeah.
What I found is if I go into title and change title to full name, I'll go back in here and over in Power Apps, I'll refresh the data source and it's still trying to say title, not full name. And I'm like, what is going on? And one day I hovered over this thing and it still said title. So underneath the scenes, the first time you create a field in SharePoint, don't ever change it. If you made a spelling mistake, just delete that column and create a new one.
Yeah.
Because once you create that column, like SharePoint just gets attached to what you named it the first time. So that's why I'm really careful with creating my columns in SharePoint. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it just causes a little bit of bugginess or causes confusion and that type of stuff. What were you about to say?
Might be a good programming practice and consistency practice just to do that all the time, because you just don't know what kind of DBMS, which stands for Database Management System. You don't know what kind of DBMS you're going to be working with. And the funny thing is you might actually have this code intended for SharePoint, but then you'll wake up 20 years later and you'll see this thing in Dataverse where somebody actually took it and manipulated the code to go to Dataverse. And you never know what direction your program goes into sometimes once it's out there in the world, So always kind of have that in mind, right?
Yeah. And I'm looking we have a lot of comments to catch up on here. Okay. So the first one, we got 3 comments coming in. So data's king. I have a combination of, so we were talking about remove if. I have used a combination of for all and remove if to remove duplicate records in SharePoint lists. So I appreciate that, data's king.
Okay.
All these tips and tricks of what you guys have learned as well. It's always good to hear that. Earl said, is for all plus a local collection a workaround for delegation limits?
Could be.
Well, you could use a for all. Well, you're only going to be able to pull back at the most 2,000 records. So if you're going to do that, you're not going to get around it that way. But let's say you do a for all and you need to modify things. You could do 2,000 at a time. So you could, and updating 2,000 rows will take a long time, by the way. Going across the line and bringing over SharePoint.
Would that be a way to do that, though, Darren? Have a local collection and dump your 2,000 records into that local collection, then have it work on that, process that?
Yeah, what you want to do is after you let's say you've got 5,000 total, and you do a for all, and you try to pull over all of them, you only get 2,000 out of the 5,000, and then you do like a remove all, or you're doing a bulk update. What you need to do then is have another iteration of that, or have the person click on the button again, or have it occur again. So you go get the next 2,000. So and then you got to do it again for the last 1,000 if we're dealing with 5,000. So in a way, yes, but
now you can't get a first in columns, right? Or first in records, right? So you could say first 2,000 and then.
Yes, you could do that. Yeah, there's a function called first in where you get the first amount of a series within a collection. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, like you say, it might take some time. So have a really cool spinner so people are going ooh and ah on the spinner while that's working, you know. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean that might work. You know, that might work.
Yeah. All right, going on the next comment here, George Thomas, renaming tables and database and Dataverse is a mess also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen sometimes when you mess with a record with Dataverse, sometimes it will require you to use the underlying field name so Dataverse is actually SQL Server underneath the scenes, and it creates little prefixes for each columns.
Yeah.
So you can get a little bit of a mess in there too. Yeah. So I'd say almost every database management, some of them are better than others, but I wouldn't say any one is perfect. You know,
it's just a good practice. Just if you make a mess with that thing, just delete the field and redo it. You know.
And if you already have data in there, and I'm gonna create a new column, what I'll do is I'll create that new column. I won't delete the old one first. Then I'll do a for all. I'll create a little for all and actually go through and move that value over to that new field. And then after I got them all, then I'll do a for all and do a filter within the for all saying where this new column is blank. And then I'll just hit the button over and over again until I have updated them all.
Now you've just done another live feed. You need to do another live feed on that now.
I could spend a whole hour on that. Absolutely.
We need to address that too, Darren. That's another cool thing.
Now, something I will say, if you guys check out, a long time ago, I did a series and I have a whole playlist on it, and it's a little long. Some of them are long. There's only 5 videos in this, but I have 5 videos, and look at the amount, how long these things are: 2 hours, 2 hours, an hour 53, 2 hours, and 2 hours and 17 minutes, where I work with the Northwind database, and I'm trying to import all this data from an old Northwind database into SharePoint of all places. But and so what I did was every other video, I did like a Saturday live stream where I prepared the database in order for the next day, where I actually tried to rebuild Northwind database and Power Apps. And then the next, and then I went back and forth. So there's 2 really long videos where I do all this importing stuff, which actually goes in the next comment here. Christoph, when importing tables from Excel to SharePoint, it will generate field 1, field 2. Yeah. Kurt, are you still there? I don't see you there. You might have gone to the bathroom. But yeah, that's actually something that Kurt and I actually experienced with some of this importing from Northwind. I actually did export Access to Excel and then Excel into SharePoint, and that was a mess. It was creating all this field 1, field 2 stuff. So then what I've learned is Access is actually a great tool to import into SharePoint. But yeah, it's really frustrating there, that field 1, field 2 stuff. All right, so I'm gonna bring back Power Apps here. And very good. So, okay, so we have the full answer. Now, we added this field just a few minutes ago, but Power Apps doesn't know about it. Kurt, you might have had a bio break, but so what Christoph said is when importing tables from Excel into SharePoint will generate field 1, field 2.
Yep.
Isn't that a pain in the butt?
I dealt with that, and boy, I tell you what, the first time I dealt with that, I didn't know what I was doing, and I said, "What in the tarnations happened here?" Right, that right there, boy. I tell you what, I got a lot of energy about that. That killed about 2 days for me, man. 2 days that I'll never get back. Yep. You're sure right about that, Christoph.
Well, look at Christoph's little. It's like a little text mode. He's like.
That's exactly what it is, too. That's
how you feel. Field 1, field 2. Like, really, you can't pick up the first line of all the column names. And I think there's actually a part like check mark. The first row is the column names, right? Yeah, it's
but
really.
That Power Apps had the same problem. So it's probably a Microsoft issue, right? I mean, the funny thing is in those moments, I could actually address field _1 and field _2, and my program would work perfect. It could not handle the new name, Yeah. But who in the heck is going to remember field _1 was really the last name? It was.
That'd be a big mess.
Right.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I never did get that email yet, so I don't know if maybe it's just taking a long time to publish. Okay. Sometimes these things take a while. I've seen it take 6 to 12 hours to publish.
Okay, here is here is a tip. Okay, so Kurt, you're set up in my organization, my Neese.us organization, right?
Yeah.
You have a Gmail account. That's your personal stuff.
That's
It
right.
didn't go to your Gmail account. It went to your.
Oh.
If you have Power Apps up,
I do.
You can just click on this little waffle.
Yeah.
And then go to Outlook, because I know you don't use the Neese's email probably ever. So and you just open up Outlook. You can open it up in a new tab by hitting your middle button on your mouse, the wheel, and that will open up Outlook in a new thing there, and you should see it there. Now, while you're looking for that, something I will say, we added a new field called full answer, right? But Power Apps doesn't know about it. If we add a new field over in SharePoint, it doesn't know about it. What you have to do is you got to go over here to the left side of the screen, click on data, and we'll go. Now I got to move our faces around here so we can see what we're doing. We're working with user answers. I need to refresh this data source to make sure we pick up all the new fields. Okay, so it is refreshed now. So now I can go over here and say full answer. There we go. Now the full answer is held in this text box here. Now this text box is called text input 14. So let's give it a meaningful name, TXT user answer. That's what we'll call it. And I'm going to click back in there. I'm going to hit Control C. Go back into the code. Now this is sort of funny. This is something really annoying about Power Apps, Kurt. I don't know if you ever noticed this. I had the button selected, and look, on select, I was just writing code for the on select. Where's all my code? Now it just says false. Yeah. What's up with that? What I've learned is you got to go back in here, click on this little down arrow, and say edit in the formula bar. Oh, there's the code. Like, what was it just doing? All right, so the full answer, I'm going to paste the name of my text box .text. Okay.
Oh, now, I got to go.
What's that? You got to go? All right. All right, so this is our full patch statement that is going to insert one row. And I sort of wanted to show you guys what we're going to do before we write a loop, a for all around this, okay? Now, Earl Z brings up a good point. Power Automate could perform that migration from old SharePoint Online column to a new column, max 5,000 records. Thanks for pointing that out, Earl. Yeah, absolutely. Never forget about the other portions of the Power Platform. Sometimes I do reports in Power Apps, but Power BI is really the tool you should use for reports. And if you have some type of automation that you need to have happen at any point, or have some type of process kicked off and maybe deals with more data, or it can go off for a few minutes and update data, you don't have to mess with it in Power Apps. Power Automate is a great tool. What I found is people that learn the Power Platform, they usually gravitate to one of these things. For me, it's Power Apps. I've done some Power Automate stuff, not a lot, but there are some people that are more skilled in Power Automate, and there are some people that do a lot of stuff in Power BI. Never did anything in Power Apps. Of course, there's Microsoft keeps creating more things. We have what are those automation bots? The AI. They got AI components and other things they've been creating. But those are the main three: Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI. But okay, so this is our patch statement, and we're going to put this inside of a loop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to indent this over at least once. And what I want to do is I want to loop through every item within that gallery. Now, what is the name of a gallery? Well, let's say gallery questions. And I'm going to say user questions, just in case our gallery on our other screen was called gal questions. Okay, so I'm going to use that name there.
Okay. Back in.
And so we've got a good patch statement, Kurt. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a loop using for all. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the name of our gallery, gal user questions, and I'll say all items that are in the gallery. Okay. So for all's got two parameters. That's the first parameter. What are we looping through? Okay. Yeah, Christoph, I was just talking about the different parts of the Power Platform. So Earl said Power Automate could perform migration from an old SharePoint Online column to a new one, max 5K records. And so I was talking about the different parts of the Power Platform. You got Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. And then there's also another one that I was trying to think of. I couldn't get it off the top of my head. Christoph says Power Virtual Agents. So you create little bots. You know how you go to a website and, well, if you go to powerappstutorial.com, I've got a little virtual agent there. It's not Microsoft Virtual Agents, but it's from another platform that I use. But thought I'd mention that. Okay, so we loop through all the items within the gallery. And I'm going to put an ending parenthesis there. And for each one, we're going to do a patch. Okay. So right now we got 3. It's going to go to the top. It's going to do this one, this one, this one. So we're going to insert a total of 3. Okay. Now it still doesn't like my code for some reason. All right. So what we're going to do here, this my record. So what you can do is, I think what you can say is this record. Okay. And that will allow you to access the current record in this loop. All right. Now there is something wrong with this title here. I've got the name of my user, full name, and I use an ampersand to splice or put together 2 strings. But then I also want to splice in this now, but I didn't put an ampersand there. So I need to add in that little ampersand. Okay. And also the user function does not have a property called name. It does have a property called full name though. Okay. And now that should work. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this global user actually has a good record, and it says data type is record. And I want to expand this a little bit here. Look at this, Darren Neese, Darren. There's the ID. There's all these other SharePoint columns that we didn't even know about. It's sitting there. There's all kinds of stuff in there. Okay, so we have good that. Okay, so something else I like to do for, you can't reference a control inside of a gallery just willy-nilly like that. You actually have to tell it this record. Otherwise, it's always going to pull in the value from that first row. Isn't that weird?
Okay, say that one more time, Darren. Could you say that one more time?
Sure. Yeah. So inside, so we're going to go through, we have 3 records of questions, right, in our gallery. So we're going to go through 1, 2, 3. If we don't reference this record, which is the row that we're currently on within the loop iteration, and we just reference the text box, well, that text box is just this first one. Well, there's a text box with the same name, number 2 and number 3. But if we don't fully qualify that with what row it's on, it's always going to go to the first text box.
So it's keeping track of what row it's on with this record.
Yeah. So that is a Power Apps keyword that you can use to get at the current record, like when you're in a loop. Now when
you're outside of a gallery, right? Because when you're inside of a gallery, it's this item, right?
That's right.
Outside
Absolutely.
of it, it's this record. Okay. Got it.
And there's another way. I actually sort of like to do something a little different, which is you can actually use an alias. It's a as my record.
Right.
Now, if you do that, you just mix. So you threw away this record, and you can actually use my record. My record.
And I've actually seen that recently come into play where Power Apps had a problem. How do I want to say that? Figuring out the reference and which one you were addressing until you used an when you did an alias, then it actually resolved the reference that you were using.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Back when I was learning this stuff, I beat my head up against a wall for a few days trying to figure out all these little things that I've learned that I'm sharing with you guys.
Yeah. Good stuff right there.
Yeah. So we'll go through and we'll insert all that. And then when they're done, what we could do is we could navigate. You know what I might do? Let's navigate. Let's create a new screen. This is probably a good thing for us to do in our application. If we say new screen, there is scenarios. Oh, they broke this down. See, Microsoft keeps switching things up. They create these little screens. They've got a little success screen to try to help you out. So I'm gonna create a success screen real quick, but it's not gonna, that's what it's going to look like. And I guess I'm okay with that. So we could use that, and it's called screen 1. Let's call it success screen.
I wonder why they don't just create a dialog box that you can use, you know, like for messages or for success or for anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got it everywhere else, right?
Well, like they don't have a menu control either. So I don't know, that I guess it gives me plenty of stuff to talk about on my channel. If they don't provide things like menus and stuff. Remember back in the days of VB6, there are things like they didn't give you a good grid control to use. You always had to go buy a third-party grid. Remember all that stuff? It's like they always leave room for a third party to come in and sort of provide extra value.
Right, and then if it's really good, they'll absorb that third-party company and make it as their own. Right.
Yeah. All right, so we've got a success screen. So we can just navigate to this, and we're just letting the user know, hey, that was successful. Very good job. Thank you. Now I might change this to actually make it look like my, if you look at how they had this set up, they have a little icon that's white. Then they have a circle behind it. Well, that circle, I want that to be, I've got a global theme that I have all my themes set to, and I'd say primary dark. Okay. I'm going to copy that. And that text down below, let me put text. Colors, well, not black. There we go. And in fact, I might make that bigger, make the font bigger. There we go. Okay, so it's looking a little better. Now, so we're going to navigate to the screen. Now, the screen doesn't have a menu. I don't want a menu on. I just want to show them this message. And I want to show them this message for maybe 2 seconds. What do you think? 3 seconds?
Yeah.
And then after that amount of time, I want to send them back to the home screen, or we can send them wherever. Okay. Do you know how we would do that, Kurt? Like if we wanted to wait 3 seconds, how would we get it to wait 3 seconds? Have you ever done anything like that in Power Apps yet?
Not yet. Nope.
Well, how would you have done it with VB6?
Well,
back in the day,
I could have used the Win32 API and done a timer function, or I could have done a timer object. They had a timer object, right?
Yeah.
Just done kind of the milliseconds.
I'm ready to blow.
Do these guys have a timer object?
I'm ready to blow your mind, Kurt. Are you ready?
Okay.
Nope, no timer. Do we have a timer? No. Input? Nope. Oh, there we go. There's a timer.
Nice. Very nice.
Now
look at that.
Would you just look at it?
Just look at it.
All right. So it's sort of similar to what we had 20 years ago here. These are milliseconds. So let's say 3 seconds. Let's put 3,000 milliseconds. Okay.
Could you just not say 20 years ago ever again?
Are you feeling old?
Golly.
If you're going to have the moniker, the professor, all professors are a bit old. They got a lot of wisdom and gray hair to go.
I suppose.
All right. So we got this timer control. It's going to wait 3 seconds. Now we have different events. Okay. So let's go on over here to advanced and we look at all of our actions. We have on timer start. Nah, that's just when it starts. On timer end. Okay. Now, whenever that timer ends after the 3 seconds, we'll navigate back to home screen.
Nice.
Okay. And we'll use the fade transition. And there we go. And that's how it should work. Now, on the main property thing, look at this. We have auto start. Well, so this timer won't even start on its own unless you go over here and say auto start. And then it has this repeat. So after it gets to the 3 seconds, do you want it to start the timer again and try to send us back to somewhere? Probably not. So we'll leave that off. And also auto pause. And I think what that auto pause is if it's on a different screen, it's going to automatically pause the timer, which is, I think, a good thing. Unless you just wanted it to run throughout the duration of your application. Okay, so we've got that. Now let's go back to our questionnaire screen where we're filling this stuff out. Let's go into this button. And then after that is set up, we'll say navigate. And we'll go to success screen.
Now, is that what fires the timer to start? Is the onVisible when the object becomes visible? Is that what fires it?
Yeah. So this screen down here, the success screen, the screen itself does have an onVisible, but we're not going to put any code to enable it because it's a control. It's a UI thing right here. It automatically, because we set this as auto start, as soon as that screen loads up with a timer on it, that timer knows to automatically start.
Okay. So it attaches to its parent then.
Yeah.
Got it.
Now, we don't want and it'll actually show the seconds going by. We'll say 1, 2, 3. We don't want the user to see this timer, do we?
I mean,
we could, right?
Right. I mean, maybe they'll say, ooh, look at that. You know, I don't know. It's all about the oohs and ahs, right?
If you don't want them to see it, you'd set this to false. So in this case, I'm going to say false. All right. So the moment of truth now. Let's go through. Now, did you finally get that email? Were you able to?
I did, and I might be in there. I don't know. I tried. Yeah. Let's see if it saved it. I don't know. You didn't say that it was successful at the moment. So, when I was doing it, didn't have success screen yet. So,
you know what? Now that I've done that, you know what? Let's hold on a second here. Now this is a good point, guys, because Kurt isn't going to see all these new changes unless I save and publish.
That's right.
And then also, sometimes it takes a few seconds for the users to get the real version. Sometimes they have to click F5 a few times to make sure they have the newest one. So
hours.
We might give you just a few moments to wait. But I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'm going to click on Start Questionnaire. And I already know there's a bug in my code. And I'm going to show you guys what's going on here. I'm going to click Start Questionnaire. Okay. And here we're on the screen. So that looks okay, right? Now, let me look back here on this button and make sure for global user, do we have? Look, there's Darren. Okay, that's good. Now, if I were to get out of it, now this is a global variable that was set the very first time I clicked on the button on the home screen, right? So we did the patch, we created Darren and put him in a variable. What happens if I was already in that database table? Would I have a good reference to the user at that point? So if we step back to the home screen, click on this button, what happens? Let's say, I'm already in the database. I close out and I come back in the application. So let's say we do account rows. It checks to see if I'm in there and it comes back with a record count of 1. So if it comes back to 1, it doesn't even do this. So this global variable doesn't even get initialized. That'd be a problem, wouldn't it, Kurt?
It could be, yeah.
Yeah. So we actually do need a false part on here. Okay. So I'm going to use a comma and I'm going to say set, just in case I was already in there. I need a good reference to it. Global user. And we'll do a lookup. What does a lookup give us?
A record.
It does. It gives us a record.
Unless you establish a third parameter, which will give you a field.
That's right. That's true. In the case, let's say there were multiple records that met this criteria, the email equals user email, it will give you the first record it comes across, but it's only going to return either a single record or a value if you give it that third parameter. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to do a lookup on the user table. The criteria is email equal user email. Okay. And we want the full record. So we're only going to provide 2 parameters. So what Kurt was saying is if we wanted to get at perhaps their full name or their ID, we could say ID or something else if we wanted to get just a value out of a field. So in the case where I'm already in there, now we have a false part to make sure that this global variable is initialized. And because I already know it's initialized, I'm going to go back to this questionnaire here. And okay, so let's type something in here. What is your job title? The YouTuber. My past experience, lots of app development, certifications, Microsoft Certified Database, DBA, Microsoft Certified Solutions Developer. And I'll leave it at that. Now, the moment of truth, cross your fingers, click on the button. And I want to make sure My spinner's on top. It is. Okay, so now I'm going to click on the button here. There's the spinner. Look at that. This was successfully completed. Yay, and it took me back to the home screen. So it did everything that we thought it was going to do there. I'm going to go into the database, and I'm going to zoom out of here a little bit. Go into site contents. Okay, so I can see here for questions, we have 3 questions. We have 2 users. Okay, so look at this. We might actually have a Kurt. There we go. We got Kurt. And then I'm going to go back. And then here's answers. Look at this. Uh-oh. We got a bug here. So it did get my answers. It did get the question ID, but it doesn't have a user ID. What's up with that? I think we got a bug. Did I put in the user ID? I thought I did. Yeah, global user ID. It's blank. Isn't that interesting? So the ID isn't generated by us. It's generated by the SharePoint system. So maybe when we get that, we don't have the full, it actually didn't grab the new values here. Okay, so this is no big deal. What we can do is we'll take this code, which goes and gets it. I'll just put it right here. Make sure that I get the newest record there. Okay. Now I'm going to save this, and I'm going to exit out. So I make sure that, so I'm going to get rid of, I'm going to dump all my global variables here. Hey, if you're getting anything helpful out of this, a comment or even a like really helps the channel, and lets people like you know this is good content. Much appreciated. Okay, so I've exited out and I'm going back in here. So here's the quiz. I'll go back in. Of course, it takes a moment. Now, if this is a pre-recorded video, I'd cut out all this dead space here, all this waiting. All right, here we go. We're going to click on Start Questionnaire. Now I'm curious, is that variable initialized with my record? Okay, so I'm going to click on this, global, well, let's see here. I double click on this variable, and it says record, and then I'm going to open this up. Darren Neese, there's an email, and there's an ID. So I should be good there. Also, what it should have done on that first screen is delete all my previous answers. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to hit F5. And all of my, and you know why it didn't delete? Because I didn't have a user ID selected. Okay. So I'm going to select all these and delete, because if I didn't have that bug in there before, I would have the user ID, but because it couldn't match that up, it didn't delete it. So I'm going to remove those manually for now. Okay. And you know what? I'm going to go back to the home screen and I'm going to redo this. Start questionnaire. Job title. The boss. Past experience. Years. Certifications. Hard knocks. School of Hard Knocks. The questions. There we go. It's completed. It's going to wait 3 seconds. It's going to send me back home. And now for the SharePoint, I'm going to hit F5. And here we go. My user ID is in there. There's my full answers. So I think we're working on it here. Now, Kurt, while I'm talking here, would you mind? Well, let me do a publish, because I've fixed a few things here. I'm gonna.
Yeah, I went back in that last one that you published. I never got it. I never got another one yet.
All right, I'm gonna hit save and publish. You know what I'm gonna do to this new version is I'm going to put in a little label. This is what I do in my applications, guys, because sometimes when you do a publish, sometimes the user saying, "Oh, I still have the same bug. The bug wasn't fixed." I'm like, well, maybe you don't have the newest version. So this is a little trick I do. Normally, I go into the app on start and I've got a variable that holds the version number, but just to keep things simple, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little label here, put it in the lower right corner, and I'll say version. A lot of times I give it a version number along with the date. So 2022.12.10. Sometimes I'll even put in a military time. So what is it, 1600 military time? Okay, so I've got that there. I'll make it a little wider. So now, Kurt, I'm going to, didn't mean to hit help. I'm going to see save and publish. And I'm going to click on publish. Okay, so now, Kurt, if you have this up in a browser window, I want you to hit F5. And I want you to tell me if this little label has this new version number there or not.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, that tells me right there that Microsoft Cloud Services isn't serving up the very latest version.
Well, the problem is, I got it from my Outlook email, and I just clicked on it from there, but I don't have it actually in my Power Apps in the sandbox that I've got.
Well, go back to your email and then click on that link again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Very good. Let me try that. Uh-oh. How about run the app? There we go. Okay, so I'm not able to see the bottom.
You don't see that little date in the bottom?
I can't see the bottom of the screen.
Oh, okay.
Try moving that to the top of the screen and republish. See what happens.
Okay, I can do that. I mean, I can put it right here.
Yeah.
I'll do a save and publish. Publish this version. Okay. Now, while you're doing that, and tell me if you have any problems, but while we're doing that, I mean, I'm trying to think of the screen. So a user comes to the screen, they see their name and their email address. I mean, you could add over, let's add over a little image here. Where's my image control? Oh, here's a search. I just type in image.
Okay, I do have the new version up on there.
All right. All right, so click on start questionnaire. Right. And then do the questionnaire and hit save and let us know whenever you've done that.
Very good.
So for this image, I'll say user.image. Very good. This over here to the side. And there's my cute face. I can fill it. There we go. Maybe give a border here. Let's make that for the border color. I'm going to pull in my theme, global theme, primary dark. Good, and that is what this looks like. Okay.
Okay, we got success. And
all right.
And it timed back to the screen. Look at that. Oh yeah, look at that.
Awesome. All right, so now I'm going to go in the database here. I'm going to hit F5. Look at that.
Well, look at that.
I've cleaned a lot of toilets and windows. So now what we could, Darren's butler, that's funny. I've been told I did a really good job. Perhaps, and then if everybody's like really interested, really likes this application we're doing, I would say the next time.
That looks like Mel Gibson.
What, my photo?
Like, oh, that's Darren. That looks like Mel Gibson.
Oh, look what happened here. I added a new control to my screen. Now my menu is underneath. So I need to make sure my menu is on top. Boom. Make sure my spinner's on top too.
Now you have that 1,000-yard stare in that photo. I'm just wondering, are you thinking about what your next pizza going to be? Is that where you were checking in that moment?
What my next YouTube video will be. That's what I'm thinking about.
I think it was pizza. I think it was what was my next pizza going to be?
I do like pizza. So what I'm thinking is probably if we were to continue this application and make it more complex is, why not have a little answer screen where we see all the users that have taken this survey or this test and actually see their 3 answers. That could be the next screen. The next thing would be, okay, well, we only have one quiz, one test to take, one questionnaire to take. We could define dozens of different tests or exams or quizzes or polls, right? Yeah. And then we'd have to wire all those tables together. So this is what I want to do. I just want to create a bare bones type of survey, type of application. So what are your thoughts so far, Kurt?
About which thing?
What we've done here today.
Okay, well,
not a bad start.
I think we did a lot.
I think if we had tried to make this any more slick or complex, we're looking at the 2-hour mark now. It could have been a 4 or 5 type of thing.
I'm trying to understand. Okay, so what are we supposed to be trying to take away from this? What was the goal here? Was it to build the application, or was it build to many, many relationships? What we were trying to do here?
Well, my angle was a lot of people saw my inspection checklist application and they wanted to know how I did it. So at the core of these are the concepts that you have to understand with these tables where I've got questions, you got answers. And in that case, it was the same questionnaire. Do the power locks work? Do the power windows work? Does the windshield wipers work? All that type of stuff. It's the same question. And you just answer it differently based on a customer coming in. Okay. So essentially that's what the heart and the soul of that application was. And I did it from scratch, from beginning to end here, and we could add on to it. But I wanted to answer that question. If you go to that video I have out there on my inspection app, a lot of people okay, I just demoed the app, but they're like, I want to know how to build it. So that's the angle I was going. But this also solves several problems, which is how do you write an application that deals with a many-to-many type of relationship. We have a one-to-many relationship between user and user answers. We have a one-to-many between questions and user answers, but sometimes you talk about a many-to-many, and you always have that mapping table in the middle, right, Kurt?
Yeah. I would like to spend some more time in the future, spend some more time on that aspect of it. So instead of going from the program or the application to the data, let's go from the data to the application without so much worrying about building the application, but more in the data. That would be kind of cool, I think. So people could really see that, like maybe when we were talking about actually setting up database tables, and we could talk about all that together. I don't.
So we started off creating this ERD diagram and start off creating these tables. Do you mean like starting off with existing data in those tables? Is that what you mean?
Maybe just spending more time focusing on the data part of it and not building the app part of it.
Yeah.
Because we spent a lot of time building the app.
I think a lot of times what people that are trying to learn Power App skills, they don't realize is that a lot of times in the skills of building an application, software development, you're actually a software developer, is that you need to have these database skills in order to be a good app developer, in order to make a good application.
You will never have a program that does much of anything without data. I don't care if it's a game. I don't care if it's business. Read a record, write a record, process the record. That's all we're doing. And so we need to know the data, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the comments to see if anybody has any questions or comments. So Christoph says, this global user variable shouldn't be set on visible. That's a good point. So if you're talking about the on visible for this home screen, you could do that. But if they're not in there, you could, so you could say pretty much this stuff right here. If somebody came to the application and didn't start the questionnaire, you could make the argument like, do I really want them in the database if they're not actually, if they're just, a tourist and not actually going to, take the question, actually answer the question. So I guess that's maybe part of the logic. Now, what I do almost in every one of my applications, I have a video, and I show what I do with every application. See, Darren, Neese, add users, automatically add user data into Power Apps. So this is an hour video. This is magically add users. Inside the app on start, I check to see if they're in my user table. I grab their name. I grab their email address. I grab their photo. And you can actually tie in Office 365 users and grab their title and their boss and all kinds of stuff. I've done that before because I like to have a good listing of all the users that have used the application. Not every user in the organization is actually a Power Apps user. And I'm looking through the other comments here. There's a publish button on the far right. Yep, we use the publish button there. And he also says auto save 2 minutes, but luckily no auto publish. Yeah. So if you're making a lot of changes, perhaps you are in the middle of fixing the bug, or you haven't quite finished a screen yet. Every time you hit save, and it does automatically save 2 minutes. The thing to keep in mind is I like to manually save, because what that does, if I do a refresh over here, let me show you guys something. And I've touched on this in previous videos. Christoph, I don't know. I can't assume everybody has seen all of my videos that I've done in the past. But if I go in here and go click on details.
Shame on them if they didn't.
Yeah.
Shame on them.
Shame. No, maybe Christoph is new or All right. So versions. Here's all the versions. Okay. Now, Power Apps automatically. Now, if I go into settings, I can change this. Settings for an app. Where is it at? Where's auto save? Yeah. Save changes every 2 minutes. So you could turn this off if you want. I always want it to be on, right? But it does not create all these different versions here, because let's say I was in the app today. It worked great yesterday and I messed it all up and the undo isn't working. I could go back to yesterday. I can click on this ellipsis, these 3 dots. I could say restore, and it would create a version 9 with the same copy. So that's great. And you know what? I should probably put these things to the side so they can actually see this. You could go to version 5, hit restore. It would actually make a version 9 up here. And then, but the automatic save doesn't do that. It's always like those sort of like these restore points. And it's going to save back 6 months of changes. So it actually has version control, version history all built into this, which is nice.
Nice.
Yeah. So there you have it. And there you are. Guys, for some reason, YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, got to hurry. Click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video, which you probably don't want. Thanks.